Waiting. All right, we're beginning. Hi, it's the 7th of October, afternoon of Thursday. It's lecture number 4 in the Sociology of Popular Culture. Welcome. I'm going to talk about institutions today. I'm going to talk about Thorstein Veblen, sociologist and theorist who is from long ago, more than 100 years. And his work, and then some other stuff about institutions and their histories, and tourism and culture. Okay, we'll see how far we get. One thing I will mention is that there is a questionnaire on the e-learning site that you can fill in a couple of sentences from your own view, nothing copied. Nothing, like, don't give me definitions from internet or something, just what your own reaction is if the questions make any sense to you. They are related to what we're going to talk about. And you can fill that out sometime during the class or in the break. And that'll be what we'll use today for the attendance check, because taking a screenshot of all the faces wasn't working, wasn't as efficient. Okay. So Thorstein Veblen, I'm not sure if you've come across this sociologist before. Not his best photograph, perhaps, but look at his age here, his lifespan. 1857 to 1929, something equivalent to, well, I guess Max Weber or someone like that, maybe a bit earlier. But in that area, 1857 is when Marx had brought out the Grundrisse, the first, and the Critique of Political Economy, the first draft of Das Kapital, right? So 10 years after the manifesto, just to place him. But he is a political economist in the US, really, but a sociologist, I think, economic sociologist, maybe. But he wrote a look, he's such a dapper man. Look at his button-down shirt and his three-piece wool suit here and so on. Although, let's see, he wrote a really important book called Theory of the Leisure Class. So, yeah, an American political economist and early sociologist, did 2 PhDs and was trained in and does a critique of marginalist economic theory from Austria. Not sure how familiar you are with the marginalists. They were really the first substantial bourgeois critique of Marxism, basically. After Marx had made his critique of political economy and transformed, well, took a while, but certainly challenged Adam Smith and Ricardo and Mill and all those people. The Bauwerk and others in Austria, working in Austria, made a critique of value theory, Marxist value theory, and critiqued that by talking about marginalism, that people decide to or choose to buy products, choose products according to their seemingly slightly more favorable benefits. And even though the margins reduce, the more that you buy the same thing, the obviously you've got more of it, the less interesting it becomes for you, it loses its value. So rarity is a high value, and their focus then is on consumption on that side of economics, rather than the Marxist orientation that foregrounds production, right? And later critiques of the marginalists, critique of their positivism, their empiricism, and not recognizing that value theory basically stands up to their critique. And Veblen is the one that makes a critique of their work. He's not the only one, of course, who makes a critique of marginalist theory. And in a way, Adorno's work is critical of that style of thinking too. Adorno's seeing consumption as epiphenomenal to understanding the processes of production, would be a standard update in the tradition of Marxist thinking. But Veblen is an American sociologist, right? Teaching socialism for many years. He was at Yale. He was at Clarkson, I think it was, a small university first, and Cornell, but then Yale was his big place for a long time. And then eventually he moved to Stanford in California, and then back to New York and New School and so on. But his main period, his most productive period, was when he was in Yale, where he edited the Journal of Political Economics for many, many years, and was really influential. Nowadays, though, people say that he was kind of a marginal figure. But that's the assessment that's being rethought. There was a period in the middle of the 20th century where people like C. Wright Mills, the famous sociologist, considered that Veblen was absolutely central. But in the second half of the 20th century, I guess Veblen seemed more like a maverick, partly because there's some kind of he got a reputation for being a kind of critic of everyone, and he also wrote this book, which is kind of in the latter half of his career, called The Higher Learning in America, which I think is a great book, but when you read it, it pretty viciously insults the managers of universities. It says that basically they're only in it for the money, and the vice chancellor is not much more than an after-dinner speaker, with a lounge suit, good at raising money from the alumni, not really an intellectual. And that scathing critique of the pecuniary interest of the managers, pecuniary interest in getting money, right? In making a profit for themselves and for their institution, and not focused on critique or education or something like that. That line, which I think is legitimate, of course got him into trouble. All right, but before that, he'd written this book called Theory of the Leisure Class, and later Theory of Business Enterprise, and then books on, what do we got here? On Germany. Very interesting. He wrote a book on Imperial Germany in 1915, just as World War I was starting. He wrote a book on the economics of the German economy, and in a way, it's sort of attempting to write what Marx wrote for the English capitalism. Veblen wanted to update for capitalism in Germany, and that it came out at the start of World War I is a bit unusual, because here's a book on Germany that doesn't really talk about the coming war. And it starts off in the preface: some apology may seem due on offering at this season so unwarlike a study as what here follows of the case of Imperial Germany and its place in modern civilization. Right, so the whole world is organizing along, dividing along warlike lines, Turkey and Germany on one side, and everyone else on the other, and the war is being fought out in France, and Veblen brings out this book. My edition is the 1939 reprint, but it has quite a nice photograph of him on the front. He strikes me as a dapper man, interesting figure, and his style of writing is inspired. His other books that I've got nearly all of them, but not all of them here. The Place of Science in Modern Civilization, really interesting. And you can look up his other works. He does have maybe there's 20 books or so. The Theory of the Leisure Class, The Theory of the Business Enterprise, The Instinct of Workmanship, Imperial Germany, the Industrial Revolution, The Nature of Peace and the Terms of its Perpetuation. I believe, it's a long time since I read that one, but if I remember it correctly, that's where he talks about the League of Nations, the setting up of the League of Nations. So the United Nations was set up after World War II. After World War I, the League of Nations was what they were. The Higher Learning in America, that's the one that's like upsets university managers so much. I've written on that recently. The Vested Interests and the State of Industrial Arts. So he tried to do what he'd done for higher education. He'd done it in industrial arts. And then this book, The Place of Science in Modern Civilization, which I'm just reading. But since it's towards the end of his life this one comes out, give you the date. Guess what? I can't. 1919. So he died in 1929, but really for the last 10 years he was suffering from alcoholism, and his second wife died in 1920. He was looked after by his foster daughter, and didn't have that much money. By then he was quite old as well. But yeah, just getting onto this. But I see that there are great, interesting chapters. I'm looking forward to reading them. The Limitations of Marginal Utility Theory, a critique of Gustav Schmoller's economics, and he was one of the more interesting of the marginalists. Then 2 chapters on the nature of capital, something on socialism, and 2 chapters on the socialist economics of Karl Marx. He also wrote on race, critiques of the blonde race, the Aryans, right? So in the anticipating fascism. So very interesting in so many ways. But it's today the thing that I want to pick up on is his book that we've been reading, chapters of. I hope you had time to read it. It was required. If you didn't, you need to go back and read it. The Theory of the Leisure Class. And the reason why we would look at that in popular culture is to understand concepts that are useful for thinking about popular culture. I mean, the key concept is conspicuous consumption. And that's Veblen's phrase, and it's become part of the popular lexicon. Like everyone has heard of conspicuous consumption, probably hasn't heard about Veblen and don't know that it comes from him. But the idea of conspicuous, right, very, very visible, or showing off that you're consuming goods, right, showing off your wealth. All these phrases like keeping up with the Joneses and so on, being into labels, luxury wear, designer wear, all these things. This is the concept of conspicuous consumption. Being seen to have the best things, and that gives you then status. Right? But that phrase and that concept is just one out of a whole range that come out of Veblen's argument, Theory of the Leisure Class. And yeah, it's interesting to explore Veblen in relation to other socialist critiques, because he is coming at things at the level of consumption, not production, although he's aware of the socialist critique. But his Theory of the Leisure Class is very different to this volume. If I can show you the cover of that. The Economic Theory of the Leisure Class. Then you read who that's by. they're coming out backwards on the screen. When I look at it on the camera, it looks different. Okay, so The Economic Theory of the Leisure Class by Nikolai Bukharin. And has anyone heard of Nikolai Bukharin? On your radar at all? Anyone? Interesting. Should be. He's the author of Historical Materialism, Socialism and Its Culture, and the ABC of Communism. So he was a Bolshevik in the Soviet Union and was in charge of producing the textbooks that taught the Soviet working class the principles of Marxism, basically. Right, so you know those textbooks, and I know there are similar things exist in Vietnam, the ABC of communism, or the basic principles of political economy for communist sort of stuff. He was responsible for them. If he didn't write them himself, he was the editor or the series editor. And he wrote this book called Economic Theory of the Leisure Class, and it's also a critique of the marginalist economists. And it lines up very closely with the kind of work that Veblen was done, except there's a slight emphasis on the value of productive commodities and the importance of distribution and production, the production process, right? And they're parts that have less emphasis and a less analytical emphasis in Veblen. Of course, he's writing some 15 years after Veblen. And while I see no reference to Veblen in this text by Bukharin, I can't believe he didn't know it, because Bukharin, right, writing this in 1915, so before the Bolshevik Revolution, he wrote this one, he was in America at a part of the time. Like, he'd been in Austria and had been locked up in Austria. Well, he'd been in Siberia and locked up by the Tsar and escaped from there. And then he was writing and working in Austria and got locked up there and escaped again and got to America. Eventually he leaves from America and goes back to the Soviet Union and joins the revolution in Russia. But anyway, I'm not even talking about Bukharin today. I could talk a lot about Bukharin, but we want to get into this concept of conspicuous consumption and the other related concepts that Veblen offers, and why they are important, how they can help us think about popular culture, right? So it's a theoretical dimension to that. Now, it needs an update as well, because that's pretty old stuff, right? It's 100 years ago for Bukharin. It's 120 years ago for Theory of the Leisure Class. But Veblen's work has been forgotten for so long. It's sort of a big surprise that when you pick it up again, it seems sort of so similar to things that are around right now. In many ways, Veblen's work is similar to David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs, where he talks about jobs that, right, David Graeber was an anarchist anthropologist at my university at first and then at LSE, who wrote about debt and wrote about the gift and so on. But then he wrote this kind of quick book for sensation, in fact, but with a sensational title, Bullshit Jobs, to say that there are many jobs in Western institutions that are useless, that are not productive at all, that are just kind of like occupying time, filling space with ideology, with noise. So like administrative jobs that push paper around and do, the classic would be to take up Veblen's higher learning book and say, well, the quality assurance surveys that are done and the student surveys that are done in the university, and all of the publicity that's done to promote the university on the basis of having done all these student surveys is kind of just excess work. It doesn't add much of value to the intellectual project of the university. Now, maybe it does. Maybe it keeps people on their toes in terms of quality, right? So it's not that I think that these are completely useless exercises, quality checks, but there are different ways we could do them, and certainly the amount of labor time consumed by having a group of, say, 12 professors swoop in and do an analysis of a faculty's teaching program and occupy half of the staff of that faculty for 3 months preparing for it, maybe isn't the best use of the time. But no one seems to miss that labor. If it's done or not done, the organization still carries on. It's not like this work is essential, and it's not like it's missed. Right, so anyway, Graeber's talking about all sorts of bullshit jobs like this. Mainly he has in mind stockbrokers, people who speculate on fictional money, and that these stockbrokers and stockbroker agents and so on will spend so much time working in a market. The market will go up and they'll do deals and so on, and then the market will come down, and all that wealth that was made disappears as well. Basically, someone siphons it off somewhere. And these are activities that contribute nothing of use to society. They don't produce any food, they don't produce any commodities, they don't produce, they're not involved in industrial production in any way. They don't add value to the society. Similarly, and they all wear these fashionable suits that, are as functional as a normal suit, but just because they have a slightly better cut or something. Product designers after a certain degree, a whole lot of jobs that are just kind of jobs for the sake of occupying time. At least that's David Graeber's argument, right? It was a little bit of a joke book, popular title, provocative topic, and warmed up anarchist ideas from like Zero Work, the people who argued in the 1980s or so that Bob Black and people like that from America, that we should give up the very idea of work, that it wasn't necessary to do all this. Right, there was an anthropology. Marshall Salins is a guy. He died just a few months ago. Marshall Salins brought out Stone Age Economics, a book, famous book, where I think it was the Kalahari or somewhere. He looked at a nomadic tribe, and the ethnography was such that, and these people lived in an environment that kind of provided for them. They worked something like an hour and a half every day to get their food, or 2 hours every day or something, and that was sufficient. And the rest of their life was leisure time. And that probably on balance, most societies could be like that, but instead we require people to work 40 hours a week, and we fill up our time with pointless stuff just to generate subservience and control, basically. I mean, did anyone miss Facebook when it disappeared for a day? Not much, a whole lot of stuff that's on Facebook, pictures of cats and cute this and that, is what, and the people who produce those videos are doing what Graeber would have called bullshit jobs. And the Zero Work people say, well, we don't need to do that work. Just stop stressing about it. Okay. Another book like that is this one. Came out. When did this come out? By Aaron Bustani, who was came out 2019. This one's pretty interesting, but I think still problematic. It's in the same tradition, called Fully Automated luxury communism. All right, fantastic idea, romantic and delusional in so many ways. It's based on the dream of technological privilege, blind to the international labor of the global proletariat, right? Fully automated. So saying that the tendency of capitalism is to make more and more machines and automate production so that no one has to work anymore. And what we will do instead is sit around making up games and enjoying designer products and lovely cups of tea and coffee or champagne or what have you in this fantastic luxury communism of the future where no one has to work, everyone enjoys the benefits of the great productivity of capitalism, and there are no billionaires that will be redistributed, and machines will do all the work, and they won't take over like the machines in Battlestar Galactica or in the Borg or something like that, right? Machines will do all the work and we'll sit back and enjoy life. I don't know, doing crosswords made up of the names of famous communist leaders like Aaron Bastani. But unfortunately, him and Paul Mason and a group called Novara Media, like I want to support them and so on, but they're a little bit romantic and don't recognize the reality of the global proletariat, the conditions in which the majority of workers in the world are working for these machines, basically. And somebody has to be mining the materials that go into these machines, and there are vicious and horrible circumstances. You know, they're very optimistic. They think those things can be eradicated by, I don't know, a mix of good journalism by Novara Media, no doubt, and concerned campaigning journalists with ethical practices that will intervene and you know, but they're not stopping the arms trade anytime soon. So Veblen stuff is sort of topical because of these type of books, right? Bullshit Jobs from Graeber and Fully Automated Luxury Communism. But I think he's more gritty than these and more meticulous in his scholarship, right? Which is important, I still think, right? And also his array of concepts are thought through over in a system. Okay. Now he was trained by theorists who are making this critique of marginalism, but also the problem with the marginalists is that they thought in terms of the individual and individual choice at the level of consumption. And what the people who trained Veblen at Clarkson and I guess at Yale, the head of Yale was one of these. Veblen was a junior staff member he came up through the ranks, and his book made him more famous, but he was a student of these sociology, political economists. They were making a critique of institutions, and their focus was on the level of the institution. The institutions had histories. They were like actors in a way. So instead of focusing on the individual choice of the marginalists, institutions also shaped and drove growth, choice, production, and consumption, interests. And there were teams of people working along in the same direction within institutions, in management, industrial elites, and so on. And Veblen wrote about this, and he wrote about these histories and the Industrial Revolution in Germany that William already mentioned, and the state, and a critique of the state. So that's partly why it also appeals to the anarchists, because anarchists are against the state. They think there should be the possibility of living without having any authority telling you how you should live, just some ethical practice. Dream on. But yeah, what's I think worth taking for us is this attention to institutions as a frame for shaping our studies. Now, what are institutions in this sense? Well, institutions would be things, the institutions of society, like banking or the university or the state or medicine or something like that. And that there are histories of that. I guess the big one for that book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, is that the tourism industry is an institution, or tourism is an institution. And that should be of interest to us, especially in our faculty where we do study tourism. And so class and the leisure class are what Veblen focuses on. The leisure class, and his argument is something like that the leisure class is consuming very visibly, ostentatiously, beyond what it needs as a way to gain status. They distinguish themselves, this class, the leading class of society, by doing nothing useful. Stockbrokers, right? Think of them. Nothing really useful, but they, even more than stockbrokers, these are conspicuously doing nothing useful. So they're spending their time on holiday, or they're spending their time just ditching around in the arts, or being a patron of the opera or something, right? Now, no doubt that's useful if you're an opera singer, you need a patron or something like that. But they perform a kind of work that's not real work for them. That's more like play and leisure, and they don't feel obliged to do it. They're not having to work because their wealth, which is substantial, allows them the freedom to do nothing if they want. But they can't just do nothing because they have to maintain a certain status. So they have to be seen to be driving the kind of car that comes to someone of importance, right? And it costs money, but it costs more money than you really need to build a car that's called a Porsche or something like that. These luxury goods are expensive for the sake of being expensive, not because that's how much they cost to produce. And they are bought by this class of people because to be seen to be the one who can afford that hugely big house and that many servants, and you don't need that many servants to live a good life, but to have that many, and then to kind of not worry about what your expenditure is, shows that you're of a certain kind of status and importance, and gives you then control, the authority to be a lord in the House of Parliament, or to be a member of the Congress of the United, or something like that. Luxury goods are the focus for this, right? And the fact that these people do nothing that's really useful except control is part of the critique of political economy that Marx makes, and Marx calls them money bags. They're not only money bags, but think of these people that go on a holiday to Condau. I'll talk about Condau later today, to the Six Senses Resort, and they live like Robinson Crusoe on this island in a hut and get some massages and so on. So they're not completely like Robinson Crusoe. And it costs them, 11 million dong per day, but that's not an issue for them. I mean, they're living a life that you can live in a hut in Condau for 50,000 dong a day, right? And still be paying over the odds. but they will pay all this extra money to have the status of staying in a 6-star resort and have been at the place where Brad Jolie and Angelina Pitt, no, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie had stayed with their children. And, you know, that's status. That shows that you're one of the elite, the members of society that can do that sort of thing. And that's not for any of us, right? Although, of course, everyone, you know, not all members of the middle class will be on holiday all the time, but we also aspire to have our little holidays. And the upper class will do some things that look like work as well. So it's not completely that people do nothing, or the dividing lines between this class are so strict. Although certainly the uselessness of the British royal family, for example, just sort of ceremoniously being there with crowns on their heads is conspicuous enough, and they don't add. In fact, they cost the British nation a lot. But people also aspire to be a bit like, to be in the manner of, to have the same tastes as the ruling elite, to have a little bit of the luxury lifestyle that everyone. So you might see that Royal Dalton crockery, Royal Dalton china, the plates that are made by appointment to the Queen, are also available for the middle classes to buy and have in their homes. And they're not living in a palace and so on, but they might eat off the same style plate. So they want a little bit of that, because it gives status, it gives attachment to the same values, and it's a huge bullshit con, right? You don't need a plate endorsed by royalty to eat a meal, and yet, sure, it's nice to do so, and some people will tour and go to Six Senses, and some people will go to a smaller hut, and other people will just go on lecture tours. Or it's the conspicuous holiday though, and being able to show that you've been able to waste some time and some money, that you're not desperate to always have to work to pay your rent or to get food, right? And you can have in your home this evidence of having been to all these places, a coffee table from Senegal, or little statues and trinkets of, I don't know, I can't really show you any. Oh yeah, I've got some from India, right? Which shows that I can travel and so on. Or have photographs, be able to show that you've been skydiving or skiing or sitting by the pool for 2 months of the year or 3 weeks in every holiday, or racing by the bay, or having a 500cc motorcycle. Oops, that's mine. Being able to waste time. This also comes from a theorist I've mentioned in the anthropology course, if you did that, Georges Bataille. And it's kind of really deep and interesting economic theory related to Marxism, but kind of going off on different angles. The idea that the sun expends more energy than it receives, so it wastes gloriously. And that's why you have the star system, right? And isn't that the principle of capitalism? Production for excess, production for not what you need, but production for more, so that you can then have more to expend. And Bataille's argument is that you have to expend that excess somehow gloriously, conspicuously, or destructively. So it can lead to conspicuous consumption, the glory of an outrageously multi-sequined, beautiful coat or something, or it can be destroyed in war or killing, or somehow some destructive or psychosis of society. Of course, capitalist accumulation isn't just production for profit. It's also theft based on originary accumulation that the capitalist class, the Industrial Revolution was built on the extraction, the plunder, the theft of value from Asia, basically, which is then taken back to Europe and pays for the Industrial Revolution. So it's not simply the whole story, but certainly this class that consumes conspicuously is there to be analysed, and popular culture is what they produce. And it was originally, popular culture was high culture, like going to listen to, getting completely dressed up to go and listen to sophisticated music. And why did you need to be in a three-piece suit to listen to Beethoven, to classical music or something, right? If not to show that you are of the status class, right? Because nowadays we can go on YouTube, be in our pajamas and listen to Beethoven as well, right? Because that's been turned into product, turned into a culture industry product. But in the 1800s, when Beethoven was producing for the classical music, it was a more rare, I mean, still a lot of people, but it was an elite thing, and you needed already to be wealthy to be able to show that you had the wealth to go and consume that stuff. And indeed, the masses, the working class, weren't interested in that. They had their own cheaper culture of, songs in the pub or sea shanties or what have you. So, this is central to the history of class and the emergence of a mass culture industry, when that elite culture was broken down. It was kind of broken. It was no longer elite and got turned into something to sell to everyone. And working class culture also got turned into product to sell. So it didn't really matter what the content was. It could be opera, it could be pop songs by Madonna, and they're all sold in the same format on a first of all, a record, then a CD, and now an MP3 or what have you, or now streamed live. And the producers of this work now get paid a minuscule fraction, a couple of cents every time a couple of pennies every time you look at a YouTube clip, not even. And the cost of this to us is also just a couple of pennies, but given the scale of everyone in the world tuning in to listen to the Rolling Stones' last tour or whatever is going on now, leeching little bits of value into the pockets of Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and the people that own the distribution platforms for this version of capitalism. And they are the epitome of useless, conspicuous consumption, right? What do they want to do? The people who own these amazing global media platforms with such power, like Facebook and Amazon and Google and so on, what do they want to do? They want to be seen to be the first to go out into space in a private jet that looks like a penis. I mean, talk about a useless thing, right? NASA, state governments have already done it, and we'll do it again and go to Mars. But individuals want to, well, they say they're going to sell tourism and spacewalks for people, but really they're having boys' own adventures, trying to get themselves up into space in these tiny cramped compartments, just for the status, for the prestige, to show that they've spent millions doing something that you and I can't do. Although William Shatner is having to go, Kirk from Star Trek is having to go into space in the next, what is it called? There's SpaceX. He's going up, partly because the going to space project has been criticized and seen as, it's been exposed as wasteful and ridiculous and so on, because now we also have democratized and banalized made banal critique. All right, so Moneybags has become just a parasite, does nothing. And Marx had already known this, and has status, has control, but that control can be taken away. That control is fictional, right? And while we all kind of want to emulate the stars and the elite, we're also seeing them break down, be exposed for what they are, just sexual predators, or just crazy people, or just egoists. And we're also getting suspicious of even wanting to have all this stuff, all this plastic that's clogging up the oceans and the food chain, and threatening to kill us all, basically. Right. So this is where the questions that I've put up for discussion are relevant, right? Let me get them up. Unproductive expenditure. So unproductive expenditure, the modern equivalent of that is going in a rocket into space just to be the first to do it when you're not even the first. But it also would be wanting to show your love by buying a diamond ring. Very beautiful and all that, but really much more than you need. Or okay, so here the question: what kinds of consumption do not have an economic return? And that question, I want to see what your answers are, and then have discussion about it, because what kind of consumption do you need, and what's excess to need? And Marx had already, in the front page, the first page of Capital, he talked about social needs at whatever level civilization has reached. So he understands that needs shift, right? So you need to think about that. With the shifting level of needs, what contributes to the production of surplus value? That value which is in excess to what is needed to reproduce our system. And that value, that excess, that surplus is then monetized, taken out of the system as profit by money bags. Makes us think of what are luxury goods. Why is a diamond a girl's best friend, etc.? It could be a boy's best friend as well, of course. Why do we use gold and silver why did we use gold and silver as the standard for the universal equivalent? That's now money. Was it relevant to thinking about value in art objects? The Mona Lisa, just a painting of a girl with a smile, or is it somehow related to rarity, to economic value, aesthetic value, status value? Think about these things. What's the value return of this conspicuous consumption? What is the value return of owning something like Blue Poles or the Mona Lisa? An individual owning a painting like that what would be the gain? Especially if they only show it to their friends at their luxurious Hamptons beach house or something. It's in relation to status, prestige, and control. So how? So I really want to see your responses to that. So let's let me put that up on go to the e-learning. So you see where it is. This is the e-learning page for our course. I don't know why the font's changed. It's gone all funny here because it's not handling thing yet. Under announcements, scroll down and you see unproductive expenditure. Right, so it's exactly the same questions. What is consumed unproductively? What consumption doesn't have an economic return? What are luxury goods? What's the value of art objects? Think about that for a while. And what's the value return of conspicuous consumption? Why is conspicuous consumption valuable to some, not is it valuable to everyone? Is it valuable at all? So I'm going to do this as the attendance. Instead of doing an attendance, you'll answer the questions. The few questions get you ticked off. The questions, they are not, they're just to gauge how much what I've been talking about is getting through to you all, right? So I want to know from you what you are thinking about these questions. So don't put the questions into the search engine or anything like that, right? I don't want to get definitions that you've looked up from the internet or from even Google Scholar or Google or Wiki or what. That's not what this is about, right? So strictly no use of Google. You write your answers, total 5 lines. So you can write in Tingviet or Tingan, and there are no correct answers. I want 5 lines at least, say 3 per question. So it could be 15 total. Don't write more than 15 lines. And take a bit of time to think about it and write it out. As I say, there's no correct answer. There's no wrong answer. There might be answers that I think, well, you haven't done enough. But you won't be losing a point for anything like that, right? It's just pass or fail. And if you do it, you pass this one. But yeah, no copying, nothing from the internet. So I reckon how long should we spend on this exercise? Maybe 10 or 15 minutes? 15 minutes, let's say. I guess I don't want to record 15 minutes worth of stuff. Let me turn the recording off and go ahead. Please do this. And well, 10 minutes on the exercise and then a 5-minute break. It'll be. Are we okay? Anyone got any issues?